Hello all, James here, and if I'm not upset enough about what I'm about to talk about, I've already recorded this video once and then found out for some reason my microphone was muted, so now this is attempt 2. So I'm not a social media guy. I'm going to be speeding through this because I've already said it once to myself, apparently. I ended up getting a fair few tags on social media, direct messages, that kind of thing on Twitter last night that made my blood boil a little bit. So it's always fun to see Dave Meltzer tanking his own credibility in his own career in real time, like Ralph Wiggum's heartbreaking. But Meltzer this time has plummeted new depths of moronic and biased takes, and this one happens to feature my old pal Dutch Mantell. So Meltzer's real issue on this one is that he's complaining that Tony Khan, AEW owner, has donated to Dutch's GoFundMe. For those who don't know, I'm sure most of you do by now, Dutch Mantell has recently battled sepsis. His wife has battled sepsis and diverticulitis. They both nearly died. It basically depleted their insurance, depleted all their savings to sort of stay alive. Anyway, Tony Khan, amongst many others, were very, very good enough to donate some money. Tony Khan donated $5,000, which is a fantastic amount. I know some people are like, well, he's a billionaire, he's a multi-millionaire. Look, he doesn't have to do anything. And the fact that he did is an incredible thing to do. That being said, Meltzer, because this is not a criticism of Tony Khan, I'll reiterate this later on, but Meltzer cannot accept any criticism of AEW, and what he wrote in the Wrestling Observer newsletter on Thursday or Friday, whenever it came out, I don't know, don't even keep track of it anymore, is just another example of that. So on Storytime with Dutch Mantell, we have criticised AEW dozens of times. We're criticising the booking and production. We're not criticising Tony Khan, the man, because for all intents and purposes, Tony Khan is a really genuine, really lovely, really nice, really hard-working person, and he's in a position where most wrestling fans wish they were, enough money to run their own deal and play booker. And yes, we have actually criticised Tony personally a couple of times, like when he said he feared for his life with CM Punk, or he hugs wrestlers too tightly or something like that. But then everything else is, professional based, like he needs a booker behind-the-scenes infrastructure, that kind of thing. It's not a reflection of Tony Khan as a person, and what I'm about to say in the rest of this video is not a criticism of AEW or Tony Khan. It should be said of that. But old dickhead Meltzer can't have any of this. So he wrote an absolute, even for his own standards, his own rambling, misspelled, warbling newsletter that's more redundant by the week. He's turned somehow a heartwarming story of thousands of people, donating, sharing the GoFundMe, and then, so many more, sending well wishes, into a dig against Dutch Mantell, which ends up being a dig against himself somehow. Let me show you the comments. Hang on, here we go. Dutch Mantell, Wayne Cowan, so this, apart from the last few lines, it's all just talking about the health issues. But then he says, they had raised $64,200 with most of care, full stop. They had raised $64,200 with most of the top donors being anonymous, with the largest known donors, Tony Khan at $5,000 and Chris Jericho at $1,500. Okay. When I got hold of, because I didn't set up the GoFundMe, it was Dutch's daughter who did this, and then they messaged me and said, can you publicise it? So I started publicising it Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, this is Eastern time, it was at 64,200 or thereabouts. So Dave hasn't looked at the thing since Tuesday. And since now it's like 94,000, 93,000, or it's over 90,000, whatever it is. So he obviously didn't mention Jim Cornette, who also sent in $5,000. He didn't mention the anonymous person who donated $5,500. He didn't mention me, who donated 4 figures as well, but less than Jericho, I'm sorry to say. I couldn't afford any more. That he only mentions Tony Khan and Chris Jericho at this point, because I guess they both work for AEW. But anyway, this is what else he says. With Khan, many have pointed out that Mantell, also misspelled, as a podcaster was brutal to Khan, even being critical of him when the promotion was at its peak popularity. No, it wasn't. We started talking about AEW more when CM Punk and Brawl Out happened, and that wasn't the peak of popularity because it sort of went down from there, really. Now, and recently criticised him, Tony Khan, for the contract terms Swerve Strickland got in his recent deal. Now, we did, and the reason is because we didn't think that Swerve has been booked as a particularly strong champion, and then is he worth that amount of money, $2 million or $3 million a year that he's getting paid? We thought not. at the time. And, that wasn't very, very long ago at all. But the thing is, that's not a criticism of Swerve. It's more the booking, and, he was going back and forth and flip-flopping and that kind of thing, and just really wasn't booked as a strong champion. But it's sort of a litany of like booking missteps in 2024 that we do keep talking about. We're podcasters. We talk about the bad and the good with AEW and WWE and whatever else we find out there. It's as simple as that. We're content creators and we deal with the news. That's how podcasting works. Anyway, Swerve Strickland got his recent deal. It is something when a former wrestler gets mad at a promoter, like we're mad. No, we're happy that he gets paid ultimately because it's great for, everybody involved who can clearly afford it and what he pays the top talents. And he was doing it after he knew the new deal was put together that was going to make the company exceedingly profitable. No, we didn't, because there wasn't a deal announced at the time. And the reason there wasn't a deal announced at the time is because there'd been a deal in the works for so many months and it was being teased, but we weren't getting any information that we didn't know there was going to be this great deal in the end. A fabulous deal for AEW, or bafflingly good, quite frankly. Wrestlers using the old school, he doesn't draw money, and not understanding that this isn't a mom-and-pop week-to-week business based on live event numbers, but one that in a worst-case scenario year would generate $250 million next year. So what you've said there is like, hey, it doesn't matter that Swerve Strickland doesn't draw. It doesn't matter because the company's going to get paid anyway. It's just like all that Meltzer's doing here, apart from burying himself with his clown writing and opinions, is he's burying Swerve by saying, well, he isn't a draw. So, okay, then. But yet he's being paid millions. But Tony Khan can afford it, so it's okay. It's just moronic. Anyway, Meltzer, apart from spelling everything wrong and just adding a sentence that didn't belong, do you know what this is about, really? Is that Dave hates Dutch. And the reason Dave hates Dutch is because Dutch, well, he's got no interest in talking to wrestling writers, really, for the most part. But Dutch corrected Dave, or at least disagreed with Dave Meltzer, over something Dave said about Memphis, a certain event back in Memphis wrestling, back in the mid-'80s, I guess, where he claimed it wasn't a sellout. And Dutch said it was, because Dutch was there, I saw the crowd, I remember it being a sellout. And then Dave has got some third-party knowledge saying it wasn't a sellout. So Dutch said that to him, I guess, on Twitter, and Dave blocked him. Now, Dave blocks nobody, apparently, according to him, because he just loves arguing with people, but then he blocks loads of people, so that makes no sense. And then... but then he also just argues with people on Twitter all the time because apparently he's got nothing better to do with his life than just gaslight his followers. A lot of them taking him to task on just the absolute crap he's come out with these last couple of years especially. So, that being said, the other reason that Meltzer's got a real issue with Dutch is for the following, bear with me. Dave Meltzer's idiot podcast rant, where this was at the time saying all these idiot podcasters are sure going to be sorry when AEW announces their new deal, and it's like, well, or like like we all hated the idea that AEW was getting paid. No one was hating it. No one that mattered anyway. I mean, I'm sure Cornette or Bischoff or Dutch or whoever else who's been critical of AEW, everybody's glad that AEW exists. It's great for the business. It's great for bumping up the pay of the wrestlers. It's great for paying hundreds of extra people money and giving them a livelihood. And it's great for the fans who love the show as well. So it's nothing ultimately but a win-win, unless you are too involved in social media nonsense like Dave Meltzer is and a lot of other people are, that their personality somehow gets encapsulated by encapsulate's the wrong word, but I can't even think of it. I'm very tired. Anyway, he's too involved is what I'm trying to say. But let's go back to this for a second. There was The Rock, where The Rock had to tell him he was full of shit with saying he wasn't at WrestleMania. There was when he said that Afa Anoa'i had died when he wasn't. There was the Backlash thing last week where, it was at the Tokyo Dome and he got such a little woody over it that he just had to post it, even though it was definitely from a fake account. And then he had to take down the post 10 minutes later because he hadn't actually corroborated that fact at all, which it wasn't a fact, it was false. And then there was also, let's not forget, among all the other things he's got wrong this year, once again tanking his own credibility even further, was posting on the Observer bulletin board, or whatever it is, the board, forum, that's what I'm trying to get at, is there was just someone on a Fightful Discord who just made up a load of fake AEW expenses, all hypothetical, and then Dave saw it, did no fact-checking, and decided this was all true on some Excel spreadsheet screenshot, and then posted it as facts, and then started analysing this nonsense, and then took it down, and never even acknowledged that he did it. So, why don't we move on a little bit more? So, this is the real reason why Dave Meltzer hates Dutch Mantel, is because we take him to task. We don't let him get away with the bollocks that he comes out with, or the bad takes, or calling people bad faith, fans or viewers or whatever. Well, that'll come up in a second as well. But here's another example of just this Twitter war that he's got going in his own head. Let me have a look. NXT beat AEW last night, 619,000. 0.17 and 323.16 for AEW. And of course, you can't be happy for WWE for their third brand, beating the established AEW Dynamite first, a show, even though the NXT, that isn't their usual night. And he's got two arguments here why actually AEW somehow won. And one of them is because CW Network has got a 9%. Is in 9% more homes in the States, that actually means, even though 619 and 523 is more than a 9% differential, that somehow if he were a TBS executive, I've actually got the tweet here. If I worked for TBS, I'd say AEW won. Well, how? They were on their own night. I mean, in the original tweet, of course, he doesn't mention that they were on their own night and got beat by NXT, who weren't on their own night, but he starts talking about, 0.39 to 0.38. I don't work at TBS. I know you don't work at TBS because TBS wouldn't hire you. But let me just go back on what I was looking at. And the other argument he was saying... What was the other argument he was saying? One sec. Yes, the other argument he was trying to claim was that, well, WWE only drew in that viewing figure because, they had the ECW hook and they went to the 2300 arena, the old ECW arena. Well, yeah, they did that because they had the foresight weeks in advance to know that they were moving, and there was nothing to stop AEW from counter-programming when they knew that NXT was going to go head-to-head with them, which they knew weeks in advance as well. So somehow he turns that, instead of a praise of WWE for having forward-thinking, to keep the ratings going on an unfamiliar night, but instead it's a knock on WWE for having the temerity for coming up with this hook to draw in viewers. So anyway, keep in mind this is also the person who argues incessantly on Twitter. I mean, he argues about these viewership figures every single week, gaslighting his followers, and most people take him to task on his own Twitter, calling him out for it. But he's also the person with the 5-star nonsense who's talking about, well, the breaking of... Who's texting me? It's DFS. Talking about breaking the 5-star system and why it's actually not a problem, and there's an infinite amount of stars that can be given, and now it's 7 stars and not 5 stars. But then still in 2024 has the temerity to say, well, 4 3/4 stars is still a fantastic match of the year contender rating. It's like, how can that be match of the year contender when you've rated 22 other matches so far this year higher? So there's 22 better matches out there. How can that be match of the contender? Just another idiotic circular argument because he cannot admit when he's wrong. So aside from the fact he's broken his own star rating system and spends all his time arguing with that, spends all his time arguing about ratings and why WWE, when they have a bad rating, he only mentions NFL, but when AEW has a bad rating, he mentions NFL and baseball and women's basketball and Kendrick Lamar concerts and everything else to try and absolve AEW from the fact that just no one was interested or they didn't promote the show well enough. Anyway, the Observer radios are just as bad, and it's just hateless and fodder. And I also want to mention this now, is that this isn't Brian Alvarez, a knock on him at all. I think he does a very good job and he's very based. And there's such a stark difference between Wrestling Observer Radio and Brian Vinny's show or Wrestling Observer Live, where they're far more just even-keeled and got more energy, and then Wrestling Observer Radio's Alvarez asking questions that Meltzer has told him to ask, and then sitting there for 20 minutes while Meltzer just rambles on and rambles on. And yes, I know he's not a great public speaker. I'm not a great public speaker, but Jesus, I mean, it's just interminable babbling. And if Brian dares argue a point with Meltzer. Then Meltzer will just shout and scream and talks all over Bryan to the point that he wins the argument by default because Bryan just checks out. And it's just getting just so difficult to listen to. Unlike his co-host on the weekends, who I never remember his name, who just agrees with absolutely everything that Meltzer says. What really gets me is a tweet that Dave made some time ago. I don't have it up at the moment, where he said he made 4 points of why Dynamite and AEW aren't getting the ratings they want, and one of them was they're not promoting enough in advance, which they're not, and the other 3 all seem to revolve around evil podcasters who have an agenda and who are trying to turn off wrestling fans from AEW. And it's like, people have their own minds to make, and he lives in a world where AEW can do no wrong. Once again, I'm trying not to be a critic of AEW here. This is about Dave Meltzer and just being some sort of ultra super fan who can't see the wood for the trees. And I just don't understand the maniac thought process. I mean, how weak-willed do you think fans could possibly be, where if Cornette or Bischoff or Dutch or whoever else says something, then that is gospel, and therefore, well, we can't like AEW because we must like WWE because they said so. I mean, it doesn't matter. People have got their own opinions and their own eyes. Does Dave Meltzer own a piece of AEW? I still don't think so, which makes it all the more pathetic, in my opinion, because he is white knighting for a company that, at least in my opinion, he doesn't have any financial stake in. It doesn't matter if they go belly up tomorrow to him, unless just all this drama just helps create more subscribers for him, I guess. But it's just embarrassing more so on the weekly, and I genuinely think he is turning off potential AEW fans from checking out the show more often. Or even worse, turning off existing AEW fans because he's representative of an AEW fan base that's such a turn-off to begin with. And I'm not saying everybody is with AEW, but the WWE has the same thing, with just this awful fan base that just hates the other wrestling show. Well, there's like some woman who's like a celebrity and said, I've watched a WWE show, I think I'll check it out. Then a load of AEW fans start giving her grief on Twitter saying, how dare you watch WWE, you should be watching AEW instead. It's like, and then she went, well, forget it, I'm done with this. But using Dutch Mantel's terrible health issues to score points in your own mind to further grind the axe is just the most pathetic, weaselly fucking just sad, sorry state of affairs, where you've got to turn sort of the milk of human kindness of people donating to Dutch for a good cause, which is basically his health, and just how many people like him to the point that they're willing to give him a bit of money to help with his dire financial needs, it's so pathetic. And here's some free advice for Tony if he wants it. He needs to cut off Dave Meltzer completely. Don't talk to him anymore. Just tell him to stop being such a fucking cheerleader for AEW, because it's counterproductive for the company. It really is. Mike Johnson said this best of PW Insider. I think Dave has proclaimed for so long that just putting dream matches out there or Japanese-style presentation with less story and just more match-focused, regardless of whether you like the style of wrestling, would work on American television. And now, over these 5 years, it's pretty much been proven that is not the case. But the fact is that Dave Meltzer is so he can't escape his own unreality bubble, and is digging in his heels now. So any criticism of AEW is a personal attack to him. That's my way of reading from it. And Mike Johnson wrote an article about that some time ago, that his entire personality is so entrenched in wrestling and so entrenched with AEW doing well that you just cannot trust him. He's too biased. And it's also already impossible to take a so-called journalist seriously who happens to be friends with nearly every single executive in the company, including the boss itself. Once again, it's not a knock on Tony Khan or the Young Bucks or Kenny Omega. But the fact is that how can you trust somebody who is friends with pretty much every single important person in one company? You just cannot be unbiased by it. So that's the video, really. I just wanted to talk about I mean, as I say, Dave Meltzer's just embarrassing himself on the weekly these days, with different examples I gave earlier. But this one's just pathetic. I mean, you can't just be happy for Dutch that so many people like him that they've given him money to help with his, medical bills and everything he's had to spend out of his own pocket as well to keep him alive and keep his wife alive. But no, you've got to turn it into some crusade against AEW against Dutch because he's criticised AW in the past, and all you did in your writing was somehow knock Swerve Strickland because he's not a draw, but he's getting paid anyway. So there you go, that's the video, and I'm not recording another one if this doesn't go right. So